Okay, so look, the first exercise on this is like when I was making the when I was making the thumbnail for this, I was writing the word grief. And I was like, "Is that really how you spell it?" It's really weird. Like it was like it's like a really weird word. Grief. See, now it looks normal again. I don't know. Um, but yeah, so today I'm going to do so we're now in the shadows, the final part of the adaptations and holding patterns of the fourth hub, and we're going to talk about grief today. So, you know, so so some of the stuff that's been sort of like floating kind of through my like I guess what I've been thinking about and just sort of I don't know what the right word is for it because it's not even like contemplating. I'm not really like noodling it. I'm just kind of letting stuff arise in terms of like figuring out what's right for Parinama, like, and how I'm going to like invest my efforts in bringing this into the world. And that's been a big part. And so, I mean, I think I've also mentioned this is that I've also been investing in like my own expansion in the practice to be a better steward of this practice. But it is really potent. And this is one of the things where it is really potent. And I think that, a year ago, I'd been like, okay, how do you make this easier? How do you make this easier? And while that principle still exists, it had to do with accessibility. And so, what I want to just say here is that this is very potent in terms of what is on offer with transfer, what can be transformed. We're talking about the absolute, like, the lived experience, where the lived experience is emanating from that we're getting into. And as far as like the ease of it, I think one of the things is the ease of it is somewhat demonstrated in TPM for beginners, where it's like helping with the creation of a framework and even the discussion of how to create a practice to a certain extent. But what I do want to just say is that I think that one of the really important things about doing this is showing up for it consistently. And part of that involves showing up to spend time in a world where you're not an asshole. I was just scanning Instagram before I hopped on here. And, in my feed, there was a video where a gentleman, I don't know if he's, I think maybe a doctor or a therapist or something, was talking about emotional eating. And the position of it was so, I mean, it's like the position of it was you suck at difficult emotions and that's why you eat. Like legitimately. And the offering, I mean, I really do think the intent of the offering was solid, like was really good. I really do not think that this person, like, I think they were called to break, I mean, I don't know what they were, but like the sense that they really wanted to bring something forward that would be helpful. But I mean, this is one of the things, like, because of my book, people offer me things a lot. Like they'll send me stuff and books and, links and things. And and I'm interested, if you're one of the people that sends me stuff, don't stop. I don't look at everything, um, the one thing that's kind of like the go no go thing for me is this position narrative that, like, at the end of the day, you need to stop being such an asshole. Like that to me, I'm like, nope, that's not it. And the thing is that there really can be valuable information. I mean, the thing is, I actually imagine that what this gentleman was offering was something about emotional regulation and spending time with difficult emotions, um, and building that capacity. I think that really it seemed like that was the offer, but to me, if it is positioned in a container that is like, "You suck at difficult emotions," versus like, it's like, because I think the positioning was like, "You're eating because you suck at spending time with difficult emotions," and I'm like, "No, like, this is core," and I'm talking about what this is all about is why spending time in Parinama is important. Spending time in the book, spending time, say, in these videos, spending time in the classes, spending time wherever we're going with this is that it's spending time in universe and spending time in a practice where you are ending the illusion of separation within yourself. You know, like the original sin, that there's something you were born with that's terrible that needs to be cast out, that there's, something about yourself that's so shameful, it just needs to be battled all the time. This is if you listen to me saying this, there is something in you, and it just is a matter of how deeply buried this is, that knows that isn't true. You know it's not true. Like, when I'm saying this, if you fight it, if it's like, I mean, just think about what you're fighting for. Think about what you're fighting for. And it's like, well, if I leave myself to my own devices, I'm a piece of shit. It's like, think about what you're fighting for. You're fighting for a notion that paints yourself as someone who's completely out of control and like there's no reason. There's a reason. There is a connection. You can trace the root back to where this division happens, and then even and trace it into like how it manifests in terms of your relationship with yourself and your life. And this is what we're doing here. And anything, no matter how good the content, if someone is telling you, here, I can teach you emotional regulation because you need to learn this because you suck at emotions, it's like, that's out. You're out. You're out. The core premise of what we're trying to work back to is like the thing about is working back to absolutely like healing that kind of relationship with ourselves. Like, you suck at this. You suck at this. It's like, no, why are bad emotions hard to be with? Get on your side and realize like, oh, I don't the skills and the tools to regulate my emotions, to have emotional literacy, I don't have them. We go back into the second hub and we find that part of ourselves. And we like, I mean, look, it's not that we just go, you're great at it. It's not like that. It's like, yeah, it's like, now I'm great at emotions. That's not the counter to like, you suck at it. It's like the counter to you suck at it. I even want to stop saying it. I wish I could erase those out of like out of the air. Is This is something that is underdeveloped. There's a reason for it, and I want to be better at it. And I understand that there are, that in the process of developing my capacity for handling emotions, that the things that I rely on that help me survive and that help comfort me in the times, I will still lean on. In the process of developing emotional capacity, I won't have this like binary thing where it's like, well, now there's no more fill in the blank. And then as soon as you do a little bit, you're like, see, I suck at emotions. Because the problem here is this internal relationship with ourselves. So, and that's all the stuff on top of it is ultimately, if we could just heal that, if like heal or whatever, or return to it, if anything. Um, yeah. So, okay. So what was I getting at? I'm getting at that it is time with this. It's spending time in a world where you are not an asshole because you are not an asshole. We are constructed and patterned in a way that we had we had absolutely the only role that we could even create a rational case for in terms of like shaping and building ourselves was really like how like to an extent like how we adapted in a sense, and then also for whatever was like our natural innate born disposition as far as like responding to things. But but the thing is that it's like tracing the root back to this stuff and um finding the origin within ourselves, and then it's like kind of like the adult big whatever version of yourself kind of reparenting yourself. It's like returning to yourself, being like, I'm going to teach you because there isn't anyone else now. Like here's the fact, this is like the part that that like sucks, is that like there isn't anyone that is going to be able to save you. Like that part is over, and that fantasy is held over from like the little like parts of ourselves like hoping for this and reaching out. And so like even seeing that and being like kind to that, kind to those like cravings of like wishing for that. I mean, that's wishing for that parenting. And but it's kind of like in a way you're putting yourself in the position to come back and like pick up those outstretched arms and really embrace that aspect of ourselves. And in doing that in a way where you're like, hey, little you suck at bad emotions. It's more like, hey, like, I'm going to teach you. We're going to work together on this. And like, kind of embracing that with like love. And like love doesn't even, it's too obtuse a term. It's so profound. It's like the deepest notion of this type of like adoration, cherished devotion to return to yourself and be committed to doing the work, to showing up, to spending the time. But that's the time. And so like, yeah, it's like my point being like this takes time. And it takes time not just for the work of it, but it is to spend time in shaping actually it's like not even shape, it's like time in a world that is not constantly on like subtle levels being like, hey, the reason that everything sucks for you is because you kind of suck at all this stuff. And now it's kind of, like there's this thing like that's kind of funny. It's like, oh, how you kind of suck at this stuff, but like here's how you get good at it. It's like, no, like you cannot fucking speak to me like that. That's the problem. The problem is that you suck at it's not the thing it's trying to teach. It's like the delivery mechanism is like and it's trying to be comfortable. I think that's one of the things. It's trying to be familiar and comfortable enough to be able to like resonate, and maybe that works. I mean, like I like as if I had all the answers. Maybe that works. I'm going to say that it does not, because anything that's reinforcing the fundamental notion of there being something wrong with you cancels out any gains in any other kind of just like facet or behavior or whatever with ourselves. Look, counterpoint is that maybe one of the things that happens is that this gentleman is talking to the version of a person that can hear that. and that they enter his practice, and within his practice, what he does is he actually, like, in spending time with the difficult emotions, deconstructs, like, the whole, um like, that whole kind of initial approach that he had. So, I'm not, I mean, it's unfair of me. No, if unfair is the right word, but it's not fully, like, I don't have the full picture. I'm just responding to, like, one little vignette of it. But, so I respond to the one vignette as, like, a sort of, like, larger cultural phenomenon about how things are presented, and then I'll put the caveat in terms of this one individual to say, I don't know if there's, like, the back end of the programming and what he's offering, because it could be that. It could be that, and there is something to be said for that, which is that there are some people, many people, who a message of kindness to oneself is actually, like, too much. So maybe, like, you suck at stuff is something that makes people, like, another approach that gets people to start doing stuff like working with their emotions. So, yeah. Righty then. Okay, so I'm gonna read Out of the Shadows of Grief. This is a pretty juicy one. We're in the shadows where we've got grief, and then we've got envy and jealousy. And so these are actually, like, two, I've separated these as, like, grief and then envy and jealousy. So these are specifically the fourth hub. And I will say that the shadow, I think like Anna Dea Judith calls these demons, like, of the chakras. And that was that was originally the inspiration for, like, just the notion that there's a demon. Hers are different than mine. There's some overlay, but the approach that I take on it, like, she doesn't have anger. Hers is, like, guilt and shame for second, third hub. But also, like, like, my take on, with or the Parinama take, rather, on these, is that these are things that are, um it's not just that these are, like, sort of like the unpleasant and, like, kind of uncomfortable and, like, darker so-called sides. Yeah, like shadow. It's that these are things that are part of the lived experience, and as acute, organically, naturally arising, they're part of how we actually can trust ourselves in the world. So they're part of how we can know, like, this stuff arises naturally to correct and to, respond and to help us just sort of, like, they exist as, like, what is, like, superimposed on people's, like, ethics, that need to be like, sort of, like, logically applied or externally applied, where it's like we have our own, most, sort of, like, in, like, healthy, I'm using a lot of air quotes here, like, in if like, in a, like, it, like, minimally affected in terms of adaptation, um being that this stuff is just gonna arise naturally in response to, like, harming another person, that you'll feel shame and wanna fix it. You do something cruel, you'll feel guilt and wanna fix it. Fear, as an acute reflex, works really quickly to keep us safe and help us, like, but all of these things, as chronic, just override our system and make it hard to really even identify where the naturally arising in response to behaviors happen. So then, if you're chronically ashamed, you need someone to tell you the stuff that's, like, there's an amount of shame apparently you're supposed to harbor all the time. And then, then you have someone else that's telling you, like, oh, that's the shame thing you're supposed to take accountability for. But, like, remove the chronic, the naturally arising just is like, yeah, I don't, that feels like that feels really bad that I did that to somebody, and I'd like to, like, actually apologize and make good and, change my behavior as a result of that. Now, for the shadows here, so that's, like, a bit of my take on them. It's not just like, here's this kind of, like, bad part of this. It's like, no, it's actually, like, uncomfortable, but the discomfort is part of this kind of naturally operating ecosystem of, that, like in a yeah, yeah, in an ecosystem, it's like a naturally functioning, like, part of the patterning that keeps things rolling. So here, grief is, so I'll read it, I'll cut, I think it gets the job done. I'm not gonna, um, double down on that. But envy and jealousy very specifically are of interest in this particular hub. And in my own practice too, I'm really interested right now about how the work I've done in this last cycle with the fourth hub has like really surfaced some of that shadow about like how envy and jealousy tells us what we actually want for ourselves and care about and desire, and that like healing that sense. And I'm going to use healing, actually. I always try to stay away from that word, but like heal bridging, it's almost like bridging that divide, like, or bringing it closer. Bring it close. I'm trying to think of, like, what this is like. It's like being able to, like, look at it and exist with it comfortably is more it. Like, to be able to understand it and, like, use it and integrate it is better than heal with envy and jealousy, because for me, one of the things is, like, if I really like, I can't look at things that I'm really, I harbor those feelings towards, like, I literally, like, I'm like, "Oof." Um, and to not be able to look at it and study and, like, absorb the qualities of the things that I want is separating me from being able to achieve them and have them for myself, because it's like it's creating this, like, pushing away of the very things I want. And so that's one of the things with, like, in increasing the capacity in the fourth hub, that shadow actually, like, with all of this, it, like, that the chronicness and the of the shadow winds up receding, and then the organic aspect of it winds up becoming like more functioning and more interesting. And it's like getting to see these things and actually have kind of a delightful relationship with them. I mean, it's delightful. It's a delight. Yeah, yeah. Instead of it being, like, too hard to look at, that somebody else has something that I want, to be able to actually, like, see it and, like, really enjoy the feeling of seeing somebody else with it and start to cultivate that sense of, like, having it for myself. So, yeah. I mean, there's a story I think I told in the third hub, which was I had a boss who was kind of a not kind of, like, sort of a, sociopath who is, like, real like lunatic. And the reason I bring that up is that, like, it was the Super Bowl, and I forgot which teams. It was like, he was rooting for one team and everybody, like, whatever, and his team lost, and he loved winning so much that as soon as the other team won, he just immediately shifted over to, like, really respecting why they won, and his concession of their winning was, like, such a study in what they did in order to win. That was like he was, like, a bit in awe of it, after all this trash talking, but he's like, "Whoa," that was like, and I remember really seeing that and being like, "That's the quality." It's like he likes winning so much that he just doesn't care how it shows up. He's, like, so leans into it, and yeah, and I'm using this as somebody who, I'm not gonna provide more context about the individual, but it is like the how much they won. They were like a, winning person in terms, like in games. In games. That's all. So anyway, I'm gonna start reading. Okay, so the shadows, grief, envy, and jealousy. You ready for this? Okay. Right. Remember, there's nothing wrong with you. Pay attention. There's nothing wrong with you. All right. So grief is an unavoidable part of loving because loss is inevitable. The fourth hub shadows are conditions of being human. The other shadows I discuss here are envy and jealousy, which can also be both a price for the vulnerability of love and an accelerant that stokes passion, acting like an arrow pointing us to what we desire. Like all the shadows, there's a difference between waiting in them as part of the human experience and drowning. All right, so grief. And I'm going to do envy and jealousy in a second section. Okay, so grief. I feel like I'm going kind of cross-eyed looking to the side here. Right. Okay. Because it's like I have the microphone in front of me, so now I can't like hold the book. So let's do this. So grief can overwhelm us with distress, making our lived experience unbearable. But to be human is to grieve at some point. People we love die, leave us, and change. Grief makes our body and mind uncomfortable places to be as we struggle with loss, which undermines the sense of security and stability because we're made aware that although it's often imperceptible, the world around us constantly changes. Once we've experienced loss, we know something about life. We know there is fallibility in all security. Nothing stays the same forever, and directly experiencing this fact will change you. It's hard to stay with feelings of grief, and sometimes the only escape, turn the page, from the crushing sensation of unrelenting vulnerability and loss is escapism or dissociation. Grief is hard for others to watch because it's unsolvable, and to sit in the presence of despair, holding that space for someone can be challenging, particularly if we believe that providing support means fixing things. It takes strength that we may not have to tolerate sadness being expressed in our presence. Yeah, I'm going to reread that again. I read that weird. It takes strength that we may not have to tolerate sadness being expressed in our presence. Trying to distract someone from experiencing sadness with a brighter perspective or a small misdirection may be what the person needs, but an important distinction must be made about whom this distraction is helping in the moment. Is it for us to avoid being in the presence of suffering, or does the grieving person want a break? We experience the loss of people who are important to us, people who take some of our. Oh, I'm going to reread that. It's weird. It's like, it makes me feel like kind of like, it's weird, dizzy in this particular way. Maybe there's a different way to set this up. So we experience the loss of people who are important to us, people who take some of our history, memories, and future with them when they go. When we can feel grief, truly allow it, we build fitness in our capacity to tolerate loss and so-called failures, and we can become stronger and braver with our ability to love. If we've never been allowed or taught to grieve, we will avoid risks in love or tap out early. The avoidance of crushing suffocation of loss and heartbreak keep many people avoiding love and playing beneath their potential, which is like a death before death. It takes courage and bravery to love deeply because loss is always a risk. Mm-hmm. So there's two kind of key points in here. And one of them is, there'll be an analogy later in the book about sort of us, as threads woven in a collective fabric, and, the thing is that, when people we love and that we've been close to die, like, they take parts of us with them. I mean, they take memories, they take our history, they take things about conversations that we can never have again. They take facts about us, especially if it's, like, people who knew us as children. They take stories that we'll never know, contexts that we'll never be able to recreate, um, reconciliations maybe, futures, plans, things we'd hope to do in the future, the present. It's what's taken in loss is, I mean, like, one of the things about love is being described as we, like, begin to lose like, we it begins to soften the notion of our separateness from other people. Loss somehow, like, creates a non-cognitive, deeply felt reminder of the fact that when people leave, they take parts of us with them. And so that connectedness, the parts of you are just gone forever. And to know that is to just know something about the world. It is not something that can actually be avoided, rather just denied. The fallibility, the impermanence of what we are, and that part of that is, like, that we're actually woven in and connected with everyone around us. And also, the thing is that the the avoidance of grief, I mean, we're talking, like, grief is just on the spectrum with love. It is part of love. And so it's another thing with emotions where it's like, well, if you kind of pull in the capacity with the, like, strong negative emotions, the positive ones, the aperture gets like, pulled in, and there's just less that can be felt. And same with grief, where it's like the more that we can absolutely feel grief, the more that we can feel love, the more we're protecting ourselves against ever feeling grief again, as we're protecting ourselves from opening ourselves into the vulnerability of love. Like, much like, you can never love someone like your first love, kind of because of, like, how open you become with, like, literally, like, no boundary or discernment, and that kind of love, and then that got slammed shut, and that, so yeah. Yeah. Mm. Yeah. So sometimes the softening of sadness, along with this jagged agony, can feel like a betrayal and loss of the remaining memory and connection we have. So we hold on to it. The time it takes to grieve will almost always be longer than anyone wants it to be. When possible, explore the sensation in your body with curiosity, find its location, and describe the feeling. Is it tight, burning, stinging, intense, or a dull ache? There's more descriptors than that, by the way. Um, Gently ask it what it needs and wants. In grief, distractions give us a moment to take a break, rest, and catch our breath as we try to forget for a little while. As the acute pain softens and delivers us into the new world that exists in the wake of the loss, we may not feel the pain in paralyzing heaves, but we are changed forever by the experience. We can be more empathetic, patient, and understanding with others and ourselves if we deny our grief. It will live in the shadow and express. Oh, if we deny our grief, it will live in the shadow and express itself in perplexing ways, such as anger and rage. Yeah, just a continuation on the point that loss changes us, changes who we are, because it does. And I think that's also part of the inconvenience of how disruptive it is that, it's even from like a notion of how you're operating your life, about like what's possible. Like whole sections get cut off in terms of conversations that can be had, experiences that can be had, futures that are being envisioned. But also, I mean, so when my father died, and I won't get into the details on it, but I mean, it's kind of like, in my grandmother, even I think about that. It's like there are certain place. I just even like these are little things, but just being like there are things that I don't remember, that aren't written down, that are now gone. They're just washed out, to sea, so to speak. We're still standing on the shore, and even that, can you continue that, maybe if we go for a swim, we somehow, capture some of that sort of arises sort of in a, ephemeral way, but yeah, that we're changed, you know. So, yeah. So when we've lost people and things we love, one way to repair our broken heart is to help others by providing the empathic space and the support we know matters. We remind ourselves that we still have so much to give and we're not alone. And strong connections form over shared experiences. A smile, a word of encouragement, listening, volunteering, mentoring, and donating can be life affirming in the wake of loss. If we're not yet ready to be a help to others, as Mr. Rogers' mother advised, we can look for the helpers, the people who are, in the darkest moments and places, showing up to help. In this way, loss and grief can reveal simultaneously the best and the worst, showing us another paradox of being human. Hmm. Yeah. There we have it. Hmm. And I think, so I just kind of sometimes I'm just like, okay, what if anything arises that has kind of like some energy behind it? And I think one of the things that I want to surface here, or that surface that actually kind of surprised me was that any grief that you're feeling is valid. Because there can be another thing where it's like, it's like, well, you didn't, know them that well, or you guys hadn't talked in years, or like a thing about like whether you're supposed to grieve to the extent that you're grieving. It's like that doesn't, it's like, I mean, I had a conversation with someone and they were actually questioning a person's, you know, grief. And I just like, yeah, it's absolutely like, it's just not it. It's not it. Yeah, it's not it. Like if someone is feeling grief, and the thing is with it is that it doesn't matter if you feel it, any shame about whether it's like outsized for other, people's notion of what it should be, or even your own internalized judgment. I remember when I was in my mid 20s, and this is like over 20 years ago, there was a guy that I'd worked with in Keene, New Hampshire, where I grew up. His name was Scott Cornfield, and we'd worked together in like a sporting goods store, and he'd been just this extraordinary athlete, a really positive human being, really kind, very clean cut, to the point he was like kind of like, almost like uncool. And he was out training on his bike, riding on his bike, and he got hit by a car and killed. He'd just gotten married, was living in Colorado. And I remember that for me, I internalized a lot of this thing like, I'm not supposed to be as sad as I am. And I was devastated. I was devastated. I remember just pulling, like, I was working as a field rep for Eli Lilly, as referenced in earlier readings, in Boston. And I would, for weeks, maybe months, I would just pull over and just be flooded with this sense of loss. And I remember thinking, like, first of all, I wasn't surrounded by people who knew him at the time. It was before social media. So it was like connecting with other people. So I was very isolated. And also like the thing that someone died that I hadn't been in touch with for years, like probably at the time, like 3 or 4 years at the time, felt like a lot of time. And I questioned that. I remember thinking, like, is this me being like dramatic? Which also, like, that's not a thing. If you're feeling it, even if it's a proxy for other grief, even if it's a safe place to feel grief, like grief over, even a celebrity dying, being resonant, and even that being a proxy because that's taking a part of yourself in that kind of way. But still, and I look back at that, and I just like, even in my own talking about it, is that any grief you feel, forever, how long, for whoever, it's just valid if you feel it. This trying to rationalize whether you're allowed to have that or not is like absolutely not it. Like, it's not it. There's something and as we'll move on, press on in the book, is like there's something extraordinarily ephemeral about certain things. about our experience as human beings, and loss is something we cannot understand or contemplate, and, like, we're trying to right here, but mostly the point of this is about the experiential aspect of it, is to remove the blocks of the experience with it. So it's like, I'm not supposed to be feeling this, or like, or even like, I'm going to try to protect myself with it. It's like that really, if there's anything in this, it's like we should feel these feelings, because the importance of this is that it, it is the equal and opposing for like ability for us to love. It like it creates the like it widens our capacity. It widens the potential for what is available in terms of, I mean, it's not the ultimate thing, but it is like, if we are protecting ourselves from loss, it is like the ability, no matter how much giving, receiving, showing up, it's going to be contracted into a tiny little, container that's like matches our ability to feel loss comfortably and not be afraid that it's going to destroy us and kill us, because it is. I mean, the thing is, part of what we are grieving is the part of ourselves is gone. But to like really, and this is once again to connect with a part of ourselves that remains and is in essence eternal. And in closing, I don't know if anybody's watching this would have known Scott Cornfield. Maybe you did. But I remember, and actually I remember when my father died, people say, I'm sorry. And the things that really did something for me were when somebody would tell me a memory about him. So like that kind of notion where it's like, there's this disintegration of the person, like it sort of like brings them, like it kind of solves for that it kind of like, this thing where it's like this whole library is like of this extraordinarily like beautiful, sort of awe-inspiring kind of notion, that just sort of evaporates and takes our books with it. And it's like, and then when someone, shows you a couple pages, like, oh no, I found and like tells you a memory, and they say, this is something I remember, this is something, and like that was the thing that like, and I didn't know that before I'd had that kind of grief, like that was like, wow, like that really matters. So, for Scott Cornfield, to bring him, like to remember him, I remember I was at his funeral. Or it was more like a memorial. I think they did a service for him in Colorado, like, and then they like with his remains, and then I think it was like Chesterfield or somewhere, like, I don't know, I forget all the towns and stuff in New Hampshire, but so there was a service, and I remember people were standing up and telling their stories, and I don't remember what I told, because it probably was like, I don't know, because the story that I would have told was so personal. But the story, this gentleman who I'd never seen before stood up and he said, because Scott was an extraordinary athlete, like extraordinary athlete. And he told a story that he was mountain biking. It's like you'd be mountain biking with Scott and he would be just like so much better than everyone. And like what he would do is he like actually turned that into like, how do I make everyone else better? Like, leader. And this gentleman told the story of, he was really struggling on a ride, and he was the last guy in the pack, and he was just like, they were doing a climb and he was like out of energy, and he just didn't think he had any this is emotional. Still, he didn't think he had anything left. And all of a sudden, he felt a hand on his lower back help push him. And he was like, it just gave me this, like, right on his lower back, it just gave him this, like what he needed. And he was able, and it was Scott's hand, of course. And so just to like frame this, if this part isn't obvious, is like, this is a grueling ride for like any mortal. And and it's like enough that it's like somebody's, like, because if you were riding with Scott, you probably did at least some riding, that Scott was able to actually not like in the most grueling part, be the person that could do his ride and then focus on like his ride and then focus on being able to like uplift someone else. And it was just so beautiful. And I took that notion with me as a leader often, and I would think, I know that I don't know his parents, but I took that notion with me as a leader, like as an inspiration, and my other story about Scott is him and I, one summer day, we did a ride out to, my parents lived in a town outside of Keene. Keene was like the city, like a large town. And then there's a lot of like sort of other smaller towns that surround it. And we lived out in Marlboro up this, like, the road is called, I think it's like 124, and it's like a hill. It's like a climb. And we'd lived kind of out in the boondocks there. My parents did. I didn't live there anymore, but we were like, well, let's ride out. Oh, I think there was a couple stages in this, but yeah, okay, yeah. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But so one of the stops on the ride that the two of us did together was we went out and we stopped at my house, my parents' house. And we were sitting with my mother. And Scott said to my mother, he said, Katie's really good. And my mother scoffed at him. My mother laughed at him. And he like doubled down in his conviction. And we were kids, really. I mean, we're early 20s. He was younger than me. I think he's like 2 years younger than me. So to like see this like really young man, oh God, like have his conviction in the face of like this adult, and like that he looked at my mother and because she'd said something that put me down, and he looked at her, he goes, and he doubled down and he goes, no, she's really good. She could be in the Olympics. And it like shut my mom up. And I just like, to have a kid, like, and this is the thing where it's like, where you think about like admiring people, and like somebody that I admired. So so grief, do it. Do it. Yeah. And, rest in peace, Scott Cornfield. And, just as I guess like a reminder that it's like to pull forward, the extraordinary things about the lives of people who touch us and bring them into our lives now. And for me to say, like, over 20 years later, that just this process of grieving a little bit right here, right now with you, like even in this, like my own capacity for love has expanded in this moment. My own capacity for gratitude for having somebody care for me, to inspire me, to show me a way to be great and to redirect that at elevating others. Good Lord. Beautiful. All right. All right. So we grieve with me. And keep in mind, we're going to do some crying. So I'm a little, listen, if you want to talk about a little bit ahead of class here, in the techniques and exercises that are just around the corner, we're going to talk about crying as an exercise in this hub. And by those standards, I'm not doing it very well right now. Supposed to be like, should be, yeah, well, get a little bit more body movement. But anyway, so I'm sending you so much love, so much love. And I will see you next time. Bye for now.